Welcome to the Responsible Supply Chain Show, where we explore the world of responsible sourcing and resilient supply chains. I'm your host, Justin Dillon, and in each episode, we'll dive into real stories from some of the world's best business, government, and thought leaders protecting people, planet, and profits. Let's get it. Okay, episode 10. I mean, who'd have thought? Who would have thought we'd get into double-digit territory? I don't know if we should get a cake out with 10 candles. I'm not sure, but I'm celebrating over here. Number 10, when you get to 10, I don't know if I really remember being 10 years old. 10 is you're right at the edge of adolescence. You're not quite a preteen, but you're walking into it. Speaking of adolescence, have you watched the Netflix show Adolescence? I just recently watched it, and I don't know I don't know when something that I've watched has had such an impact on me. I mean, it just stayed with me for days, and I'm not going to ruin it. I will tell you, it is difficult but important to watch, and sometimes that's just what we need. We need things that are difficult and important to hear and difficult and important to watch. What makes a great artist or a great creator is someone who can wrestle with difficult things in such a palpable and meaningful way. And this show on Netflix does that. It takes on the issue of social media and kids and the impact on kids. What blew me away about this show is how they did it. If you didn't know a lot about film, you might, or you didn't read up on the show, you might miss the fact that each of the 4 episodes, which are, about 50 minutes, each of them are called oneers or one take. What that means is the camera never stops. It never cuts. You're essentially watching a 1-hour play. I went deep on this. I watched all the YouTube videos on how they made it. It just blew me away. Here's the thing. You can make something that's important, yes, and that has social commentary, yes. But then you can make it in such a way that you make it so difficult, so impactful, the way in which you made it. They could have easily made that show, edited it like you would typically edit it. But they put this forcing function in creating this show that forced everyone working on it to be at their absolute best performance. The lighting people, the actors, the sound. Because if anyone screwed up, you would have to start all over again. You couldn't cut. And I just think it was genius that the makers of this, the producers of this, chose to put that forcing function of this subject matter is so important to us that we're going to make it impossible for us to not focus and give our absolute best. And I'm telling you, there are some of these kids that are performing in this are going to not only receive an amazing career ahead of them, but are going to receive awards for what they did. What does this have to do with responsible sourcing? It asks the question that we all need to be asking about everything that we do. How can we ensure that the products that we are putting into the world aren't hurting anyone, either in the production of or the use of? I challenge anyone to watch this show and not ponder that question. How are the things that we're making, the things that we're putting into the world, is the production of these things harmful in any way? Enter responsible supply chains. Or are they harmful to the people that are using them? And whether you're in social media or in something with a supply chain, this is a question. This level, where does the responsibility fall? This is a question that this show provokes, particularly in social media. This week, I speak with Dr. Lea Esterhuizen, a data scientist focused on human rights and supply chains, and the founder of the consultancy group And Wider out of Amsterdam. This is someone who understands the problem she is solving, which is the protection of vulnerable workers in supply chains. I found her someone who speaks from a deep level of expertise and conviction. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Lea, where am I finding you today?
I'm actually in Haarlem, due west of Amsterdam.
Mm.
Out of the office today and working from home, which is great.
Well, I'm glad you're here. I have a pressing question. What do European companies think about the United States right now?
I think European companies are a bit shell shocked,
Yeah.
uh,
Okay.
but I'm
Fair.
hoping European companies are good at distinguishing between a government policy, unwise trade policy, and the American people and their peers in that
Yeah.
landscape. But I'm sure shell shocked is the right word. Some in disbelief.
Well, just so you know, it's the same over here. We're all somewhat shell shocked as well, and I think everyone is trying to find. It's true. I mean, everyone's trying to find a sense of normalcy. Well, it's good to meet you. You have one of the most fascinating profiles. So you're a data scientist. Tell me if this is correct. Data scientist working with multinationals on supply chain responsibility. That tracks. But then you've spent, was it 23 years focused on working on state sponsored violence, genocide, forced labor, violence against children in places like South Africa, Bosnia, Middle East, UK? Also true?
Yeah, also true, indeed.
So maybe you can start from the beginning. Where'd you grow up? And I'm assuming where you grew up led you to that work, and then maybe walk us to how that work leads to what you do today at And Wider.
Well, I grew up in apartheid South Africa. I guess I had a hippie mother who was very well informed.
Yeah,
And in a
cool.
South African context, she was appropriately uncomfortable in the Legoland I grew up in and we lived in.
Mm,
So she chose to educate us as children about why there was a mellow yellow van that used to come and collect the nannies and housekeepers when they didn't have a passbook. A mellow yellow van was actually a childlike reference to the yellow police vans that
wow.
used to collect Black South Africans who didn't have their permit books to be in the white areas. So she taught us. I was really fascinated when I was about 5 about what these men were doing and why they seemed so unkind,
Mm,
and and why my own kind of nanny's sister was taken away in tears one day. And my mother sat me down and she said, "You know, this beautiful suburb is a surreal place because just beyond it, some ugly stuff is going down." So I
mm,
was taught growing up what
mm,
that was about and what social injustice was all about. We were the beneficiaries of that social injustice, which left me with a very strong sense of moral debt. When the revolution happened in '94 in South Africa, there was a secret part of me that wanted to become an architect or, an
mm,
artist. It felt to me as a righteous teenager that that kind of career option was indulgent. So I fell backwards into data science essentially with the idea that every revolution needs good data, because when the dust settles you need to know where the urgency lies, and that
mm.
visibility means that whatever pot of resources you've got left you can dedicate to fixing the worst problems first. It could make a contribution to turning the lights on and getting stuff fixed.
Tell me how that led to, working in conflict war zones.
Majored in African politics. At the time, the Truth Commission was South
Hmm.
African Truth Commission was the foundation stones were being laid, and I
Yeah.
found this incredibly exciting. So essentially, got involved in doing a master's degree in data science, or social research methods as it was called at the time. And then I got a PhD scholarship. I still to this day am convinced it was an administrative error. And this was during the era when in the UK, asylum seekers from Darfur were being sent back to Khartoum, to Sudan. So it
Hmm.
was very
Yeah.
tragic. But then kind of pulled sideways by a former student of mine to work in the MENA region during the Arab Spring.
So much there. So what were you doing in these areas?
My interest in setting up systems to understand what the early warnings are
Mm,
of genocide or institutionalized violence or humanitarian crisis. so that UN agencies, mostly in those years, could see the early warning and start to act, start to deploy resources, people, start to get kind of local community radio stations, pumped up and moving, that kind of thing.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I can see how I'm starting to put together how you got to where you are, because
And
yeah, that's we call that proximate data gathering, which is how are you finding this information. Most people would look at the work you did, it's like, oh, that's social work, that is humanitarian work, but you were doing data work. I mean, you were doing data collection. So
yeah.
how did that lead to, you now working with multinationals and bringing, it sounds like you bring a lot of that, that initial work into what you do today.
Correct. Just one comment back to that history before I dive into that question is that
Yeah.
I want to make it clear that I'm often self-conscious when people talk about their pasts. It sounds
Mm.
like you were a fully fledged professional throughout. I was very much a learner, and from the early stages, I was often just doing kind of foot soldier work in the building of those data systems. So from
Are you saying that you were making it up as you went along?
yes, of
Right?
course.
You mean, wait, so no one gave you a plan and steps to follow?
Well, it's life, no?
Well, but that
Yeah,
I think that people think that this type of work is somehow so empirical and planned, and that somehow justice is just a paint by numbers.
oh God.
It is 100% making it up. I got to interview someone years ago who worked with Dr. King when they were getting started, and they were all of like 18, 19 years old. And he told me, he's like, Justin, we were 100% making it up as we went along. I know it looks great from where we are now, but we were making it up. And he was just sending us out going, their number one strategy was go figure it out. And that sounds
Exactly.
like what you were doing.
And actually, that's the hook. It's about going to figure it out. And when
Yeah.
there's a big crisis, there's an urgency to go and figure it out.
Mm,
And you have to figure it out fast. And it was the where the hell is the data going to come from question
yeah.
that landed on my desk. And that
Yep.
was what I was drawn to. So the commonality, the kind of the tie that binds genocide and institutionalized violence and forced migration on one hand and human rights along supply chains on the other was a tragedy on a platinum mine. So
Mm,
I was working for Save the Children Sweden, based
hmm.
in Beirut. I'd fallen pregnant. These things
Hmm.
happen.
Yep.
And there was this headline about a group of rock drillers that had been shot and killed as they fled for home during a workers' protest, shot
Mm,
and killed by the post apartheid police.
mm,
I saw the story and thought, oh my God, what happened there? The circumstances on this mine had been that as the workers' protest kind of evolved over 5 days, fatalities had grown
mm,
from day one to day five, and attendance at the strike had grown. Now, in my all my years, 23 years, as you mentioned, on genocide and forced migration, I'd never seen this phenomenon before.
mm,
I'd never seen people essentially drawn to a situation in which they stood a higher chance to lose their lives. You flee.
mm,
So I thought, well, let's find who knew what in these circumstances.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
and discovered the mine was only financially audited. There was no social auditing going on, and
Mm,
it's the extractives. So discovered quite quickly, extractives was all a big invisible,
mm,
soup, and that it wasn't just extractives. I then thought, oh shit, shipping and fishing, it's going to be very invisible. And indeed, again, the same set of circumstances applied. Then I started to encounter the concept of the social audit, was a bit shocked by the social audit, because as a data scientist, data validity is really important.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
need to bloody make sure that the picture you're generating is accurate. And
Yeah.
there's just too much falsification in a situation where you've got a scheduled time and external inspector coming to visit the site, fully announced, you're not going to get
Wait,
business
are
as
you
usual.
saying social audits aren't perfect?
Yes.
You mean the primary tool that companies use to get data out of their supply chain
It's
isn't very
beautiful.
accurate? This is shocking. This is news.
Well,
This is going to be at front of the page of the New York Times today.
actually, a social audit can have a phenomenal value add if you have a
Yeah.
phenomenal auditor, but it's so
Yeah.
contingent on the human beings. And worst case scenario, it's reassurance theater.
Reassurance theater. That is going on a post-it note. Okay, so it's telling the story that we want to hear, not the one that we need to hear. Got it. I think that for most people, they're never going to go, to a platinum mine, even if they work in extractives industry. They're likely or in electronics industry. They're never going to go onto a shipping trawler. You're not going to see this level. But companies still are interested in this data. Can you tell us a little more about how NWIDER does that for companies?
Sure. Essentially, and wider monitors human rights impacts and working conditions using mobile tech. The joy about a global supply chain in 2025 is that, generally speaking, whether you're talking about smallholders or workers, they have a mobile phone in their pocket. And so, what Unwired does is use the mobile channel to gather data at regular intervals. We reach out, 4 times a year to a workforce or to the kind of smallholders participating or sending their cocoa or sugar to a cooperative. And we check in and say, right, ask 20 questions. It's a 5-minute survey, always in the language of the worker or smallholder's choosing. She never uses her voice, never mentions her name, simply presses 1 for yes, 2 for no, 3 for don't know. So low tech on the data collection side, not an app, not assuming any digital or numeracy or literacy, because
Mm.
as you and I know, where these human rights risks are concentrated, they are systemic risks. They're not
Hmm.
risks, they're not risks that rely on the individual employer who's decided over dinner what labor practice they want to apply to their workforce. Frequently, it's more complex. There are deep roots for these
Mm.
particular labor practices. So,
Mm.
a collaboration of brands, all looking at the same
Mhm.
dashboards and reports, and acting together puts us in a much better position to actually improve the picture.
Every board, every management team right now is thinking about their supply chain. Probably not the way that we think about supply chains, but they're thinking about it, right? Tariffs have now changed the way everyone is thinking about where things come from. And it's interesting because supply chains have had a kind of big last 5 years. COVID made people think about supply chains, went away. Laws came, people started thinking about it, went away. Does it feel like now, with the tariff and trade focus, that it's going to be impossible to think about a business going forward without thinking about how the supply chain is structured? Can you give me a little bit of sense of like where we are in like the sea change around awareness of challenges and how supply chains snake through the world?
So resilience is all about relationships.
Mm.
And relationships are strongest when they're based on integrity and transparency, when they're based on trust. So, in these circumstances, resilience comes from visibility in relationships. What we see amongst our clients is they're bracing themselves.
Hmm.
Sustainability teams understand that this is a dark moment for human rights in the sense that when supply chains need to change quickly, um, in a in when there's a kind of high pace of change, um, relationships are compromised in a big way, and you don't have the kind of long history, deep knowledge of one another anymore. You
Mm.
often kind of suddenly partnering up with trading partners you don't know, you don't understand the legal
Sure.
context. Everyone's sprinting in the dark. So essentially, what I see is sustainability teams who understand that they'll have to become even more savvy about how they
Yeah.
conduct due diligence with these new trading partners. That's going to be a
Yeah. And
really tricky
can
one.
this be a reset? I mean, the with the shock and awe, to borrow an old term, of how supply chains are going to be reset for folks that work in responsible supply chains. The old parlance of the way you talk about things will need to change. And it seems like supply chains are going to be scrutinized. Choices are going to be scrutinized much more based on resilience and durability.
Mm.
And the hopeaholic in me believes that inside of that can be the argument of human rights is part of sustainability, is part of durability, is part of resilience. And if you miss that box, yeah, I mean, why can't you just make that part of the decision tree?
Why do the front-running brands with mature due diligence systems take an interest in human rights along their supply chain? Because viable businesses treat their people right.
Hmm.
Viable, reliable trading partners don't don't need to rely on forced labor to run a business. So as
Hmm.
soon as you have those elements in your supply chain, you know it's fragile. You know the minute there's a pandemic or a change,
Yeah.
it's going to be fragile.
Well, you talk about how there are two reasons why companies do sustainability due diligence, the monitoring, addressing of impacts on people and planet, purely to comply, which is external regulatory, and the other is to protect their supply chain and brand, strategic driver. Can you say a little bit more about those two reasons, and can they play together?
These companies who fall under the pure compliance category are companies who will search for certifications where there's the biggest interval in terms of time or the longest expiry date. So this is a certification process that'll happen every 1 to 5 years, and that's enough. That'll be enough because it'll
Oh
check
yeah,
a box. So it's all
yeah,
about box checking.
I
It's
know.
not about it's not about taking it seriously because they don't see it as a strategic risk to the supply chain or their business.
Yep,
But then the other bunch see human rights as a strategic risk, human
yep,
rights as either a strengthener or a risk to
yep.
their supply chain and business. And so they get going with infrastructure. C-level gets it. It's part of risk management. It's non-financial risk management.
Well, I mean, I've heard you also say that there's the term like due diligence has a negative association, and I'm I'm a word person. I like words. I believe that words make worlds, and I believe that we sometimes words become our little darlings, and we want to hold on to terms that we've grown up with or studied under or built a career around. And what I think we forget is that words sometimes have a past due date, and we don't know how to reinterpret or re-explain what we're trying to achieve in the world. And when you hear due diligence, it does sound like something's wrong, or that you've got it. It sounds like going and taking a test, and instead of fixing something or improving or optimizing. I mean, imagine if you just completely got rid of due diligence and called it optimizing.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, I can't help but notice that often when it comes to social justice and human rights, we like to steal vocabulary from the finance sector.
Hmm.
So we like to pull frameworks and vernacular from the finance sector because we think then people will take it seriously and fund the
Yeah.
shit out of it. So um, but actually, the tricky bit with the concept of due diligence, and I have huge respect for it, and I absolutely think we need regulation in place
Hmm.
to insist on it. However, the cultural pitfall with due diligence is that it comes from the financial and transactional world where it's all about finding and not fixing, exactly as you said. What frustrates me about about the focus on due diligence is it's all gloom. It's
Yeah.
this notion that all we're doing is chasing the identification of risk, and if we've if we've detected the risk and there's some action plan in place, usually entirely the responsibility of the supplier to fix the problem,
Yeah.
then we've checked those two boxes and it's done, and we communicate our little log of number of issues detected and number of caps in place, and then we we're sorted. My frustration is, hey, it's not just gloom. That intelligence process, that listening process needs to pick up the good stuff, needs to pick up
Yep.
improvements and progress, because that's what should get everyone excited, because we get what we focus on. Let's focus on improvement. And let's inject some new language in here that also includes improvement and also includes, shared responsibility by buyers and suppliers in
Mm.
generating strain that affects workers.
Somehow there's this idea that when you buy services or data from companies like ours, that somehow you have to hold on to it and you're in control of it. Why aren't companies sharing this information freely, opening it up to their suppliers to help them run their businesses, not as a stick, but as a carrot? What's in the psychology around just like my data, my problems? I'm going to hold on to it. I pay for it.
I think it comes from the arrogance that's wired into the architecture of a global supply chain. I
Mm,
think the imbalance of power is that the one who pays the bill stipulates how the rules work.
mm,
And intel and information is power. So there's a little bit of an assumption that the visibility needs to come to us. We need to have this vantage point. We'll tell you what you need to know. And I think it doesn't serve the supply chain.
no.
It doesn't serve the supply chain to have the control tower staffed by half of the professionals who need to be in there. A supply chain is a joint venture. There's a whole lot of contextual factors that explain impacts along a supply chain, not merely an employer. Also the buyer and purchasing practices are in the mix. So it's a joint venture. You jointly form and shape the circumstances that apply. Therefore, intel about that supply chain should entirely be shared. Software platforms should be hardwired to ensure that data is shared.
Mm.
And that's what sets the whole relationship up for success when the shit starts to hit the fan, when things
Yep.
get hard. If you're both singing off the same song sheet, you know that there's a challenge. It's been coming for a while. You've already been chatting about it every now and again. Then you're ready. You're
Yep.
ready.
The whole point of this show is to help those that are working in this space to optimize their work, to improve, to learn soft diplomacy skills, to really learn how to be a contributor to the business. So given the, of shock and awe and chaos theory of the tariffs that we're living under, what advice would you give to supply chain managers who still need to do the work to comply with these laws, of which there's dozens of supply chain regulatory laws around the world, including CSDDD?
Don't do this because of regulation. If you do it in a thoughtful manner, and you go for the systems and infrastructure approach rather than the reactive pure compliance approach,
Yeah.
then you'll be in the situation you need to be to handle this period of deep uncertainty. Secondly, look after your relationships. In this period of uncertainty, ensure that your communication with your suppliers is respectful. Don't squeeze them too hard in this
Yeah.
period.
Yeah.
Don't turn up the pressure. It's not going to serve you well, in the storm. Thirdly, be proactive in your priority areas. Turn the lights on and stay close to those suppliers in the areas that are considered higher human rights risk. Areas in the supply chain, sourcing geographies, particular activities associated with higher human rights risk. Have the additional measures in place. Use good data and tech, to help you here.
That is fantastic guidance, and I couldn't agree with you more. It seems like this is an incredible time for buyers and sellers to learn new collaboration skills, learn the value of their trust and increase their trust. Lea, thank you so much for coming on the show. I hope you can come back on. You're a wealth of knowledge, and you are clearly one of the most fascinating and heartfelt or heart-led guests that we've had here. So keep going, keep being a hopeaholic.
Oh, thank you, Justin. And thank you also, a little shout out to our friend Bora yourself.
Oh, yes.
connecting us. But it's really been a privilege. I love listening to your podcast. You know, you're such a wordsmith and such a kind of generous host. So
Thank you.
thanks for giving that to me today.
Well, I'll make sure
joy.
that finds its way into the edit. This is the one thing, the part of our show where we dig deeper into one idea from our interview. What's most striking about listening to Lea is that she is both a brilliant supply chain data scientist and incredibly useful to vulnerable workers in those supply chains. You see, she's found a way to offer both value to the business while also supporting the values that everyone in the business probably agrees with. You can tell by listening to her that she has built a life and a career of purpose. She's proof it's possible to be both useful to the company you serve and useful to the wider world you get the privilege to live in. Look, supply chain management is a grind, and it just got harder. There's no mistaking that. But operating our supply chains with a focus on protecting workers offers us something much deeper than just a paycheck. Viktor Frankl, one of my heroes, the famous psychologist and Holocaust survivor, said that when humans stop living with a sense of purpose, they devolve into mere pleasure. My hope for the community we are building here is that each and every one of you find purpose in your work. Because if you're working on supply chains, you have an incredible opportunity to improve both the business and the world and create returns that will last way beyond your life. Thank you for listening. Please make sure to subscribe so that we can let you know when the next episode comes out. And please go to freedom.co to sign up for more updates. See you next time.